And even with like social media, you typically lay off of Twitter and stuff like that too, right?
Yeah, I typically do Twitter.
As you probably should.
Yeah, I read something about Twitter not too long ago. Well, not just Twitter, but just kind of like social media in
Sure.
general, because I was wondering why is it so addictive? I noticed that as soon as I would get on, it was a bit of a snowball, as if I almost couldn't set my own personal boundaries or limits to stop getting on it once it had
Yeah.
happened. So
Just an endless feed of distractions, you know?
endless feed, and not
Hmm.
just, not just the scrolling through, but just sort of the daily routine of when I first sit down, I check Twitter, and if I do that one day, the chances are I'm doing it the second day and the third are so high.
Yeah.
So the reason that, I try to limit myself, and this is, I read that addictive, what is it? The platforms that evoke a stronger emotional response are typically the ones that become the most addictive. And once I kind of made that connection, I was like, okay, I don't want to. I want to make sure I'm careful.
Yeah.
I want to limit my interaction on these social media platforms, so that basically like the addiction or the urge to check and see what's going on doesn't creep in during crucial moments when otherwise I should be present.
Right. Well, and I think the key word there was like emotion, because, you know, Twitter is certainly an emotional place. You know, it's just one hot take, or even just any take after another with like no repercussion for the takes. And you see it in a sequence that's like all connected to each other, but they're all like different thoughts from just random people, and with no chance of actual discussion. It's not like you're just telling me your thoughts and then I tell you my thoughts. You just see an endless sequence of it, you know? So I think Twitter specifically is like, I mean, every social media obviously has its quirks, but Twitter can be one of the ones that's really tough to have an open dialogue. And that's what raises emotions, you know, and makes it more addicting.
So true. It's so true. And I think once I made a similar connection to that like, oh, this is what Twitter is, as I had been using it. And then that's when, yeah, it was the moment when I realized it didn't really line up with the things I valued most, which is civil
Mm-hmm.
discussion, with people who obviously they have a respect for one another. And then on Twitter, even if, say, the two random parties who have never had a conversation before until this very moment are being civil, it can be interpreted differently.
Right. Because everybody else gets to peek in on other people's conversations, and then they become the judge. They
Oh,
become the final say in what happened.
yeah, it could even be interpreted differently from, the opposite, the party sitting
Right.
across from them that they're talking to, because you don't know who that person is.
And you
Uh,
only have so many characters to clarify.
you only have so many characters to clarify, and everyone has their imprint, kind of. You know what I'm saying? Like, as far as how they communicate, and how closely does that line up to actually how they communicate face to face,
Right.
like we're doing right now. For example, if I were to ever have a conversation, say, with my dad for the very first time on social media, I would I would think he was a cold person, because
Yeah.
I get such short responses from my dad. But that's not who my dad is. He's very
Right.
warm, he's very supportive and loving, he's goofy as all get out. But, the way when we communicate over text, it's very just informative and very short. Like, I get K'd by my dad all the time,
Right.
and I don't think anything of it, because I know my dad.
Yeah. You know him. You've
Exact.
spoken to him before. You know what his tonality is and whatnot.
Yeah, we have a very, we have a great relationship, him and I.
Hmm.
Whereas someone else, if I get K'd by them, I'm like,
I'm gonna K you back.
yeah, exactly. I take it at face value, like, oh my God, I just got K'd.
Yeah.
And here we go. And then there's a string of thoughts attached to that. And,
Yeah.
we're already probably too deep in at that point if
Yeah.
that sort of thing
Well,
happens.
And Twitter like almost entirely text based. I mean, obviously there's images and videos, but it's made for text communication. So naturally anything like tonality, facial expressions, it all gets lost. And it's a breeding ground for misconception and anger, really, because people getting frustrated over the misconception. You know, as other platforms like Instagram, it works a little bit differently. That's not to say Instagram is also a Peachy King website, but like, because it's mostly picture based, it's not really about people pushing their own opinions or whatnot. I mean, you could argue they make a visual hierarchy and start ranking people based on their looks and stuff like that, and fair enough. But it's just interesting how Twitter specifically caters towards such a opinion bubble that's just explodes every 5 seconds, you know. And basically, I applaud you. Good on you for not being on Twitter very much. Anytime I talk to any of my guests, they say that they're not on Twitter, I'm like, you know what? I very much appreciate that. It's kind of tough because, you know, it's such a big place to network, especially as like for like a small creator like myself. It's, you know, YouTube already doesn't do a fantastic job at bringing people into smaller creators. So most of my very little retention comes from things like other people retweeting and stuff like that. So I feel I'm almost locked into it, but I've done a couple of things, and you fellas watching at home could try this as well. Try deleting the apps from your phone at the very least. That way you have to actually type in the URL if you ever want to use it, and you will want to use it so much less. I guarantee that. But yeah, anyway.
That's a really, really great point. Anytime I use Twitter now, it's exclusively on desktop.
Yeah.
And
nobody likes to use Twitter on desktop, so it's great.
Yeah, no, it really does. It does change your relationship with the app itself, and it slowly breaks away those habits of checking it compulsively.
Yeah. And another thing you could try with other social media as well, if you don't want to delete it, you could just try turning off notifications. You know, the apps are made to keep bringing you back in just because someone liked something you posted. You know, it's not really a reason to come back to social media because someone liked what you put out, you know. And that's one of the things I recommend also. But,
yeah, great advice across the board.
Social media could also have its own dedicated episode. In fact, I plan on covering it at some point. So I'm going to kind of move on to another topic. Hey there. You just watched a clip from my creative podcast. If you'd like to check out the full episode as well as other episodes as soon as they come out, you can support me over on Patreon for the $3 tier, or you can just subscribe here and wait for clips and podcast episodes to come out eventually.